Welcome back to Quick Films. Today, I'm going to explain the first 4 episodes of the Canadian horror drama series, Slasher, released in the year 2016. Spoilers ahead. Like the video and subscribe. At the start of the series, a guy is getting ready for Halloween. Due to pregnancy, his wife Rachel is sadly unable to attend the Halloween celebration. She asks him to go and enjoy it with a friend, Alan. A while later, the doorbell rings, and when he answers it, he sees a man wearing a mask. The guy invites the masked man inside, thinking that he is his friend Alan with a Halloween costume. Soon after, the doorbell rings once more, and this time the man sees Alan at the door. He then asks the man in the mask about his identity, but the masked man quickly stabs him with a sword and ends his life. However, the man lets Alan get away. At that very moment, Rachel finds her husband's condition, so she tries to get away, but the executioner prevents her from doing so. After a while, the police arrive at the murder scene and discover the couple's lifeless bodies, and they discover the executioner sitting on a couch with Rachel's infant. The scene shifts to the present, where a woman called Sarah and her husband Dylan are moving back into their former home. It is revealed that Rachel, who was killed in the previous scene, is the mother of Sarah. The couple decides to move on from the past and make a new beginning. The following day, Sarah meets with her old friend Cam, who is a police officer and Alan's son. After conversing for a while, she starts talking to her new landlords, Robin and Justin, who give her the key to her new workplace. In the meantime, Dylan begins working for a newspaper company under the direction of Allison, his supervisor. As she makes her way back home, Sarah offers her neighbor Mrs. McBride a ride, but the latter appears to despise Sarah. In the evening, Sarah and Dylan make the decision to watch the executioner's probe since Sarah is interested in what happened to her parents. However, she soon gets offended by the inquiry and goes outside for some fresh air. As she moves down the street, she feels like someone is following her. When she turns around, a man costumed as the executioner is seen moving in the direction of her. Terrified, she flees the place and eventually runs into Dylan, but the executioner has already vanished by that time. She shares with Dylan about the executioner, so he heads in search of him. After a brief stroll, Dylan comes across several kids and questions whether it is their malicious behavior. When no one responds, he reprimands them and tells them to go. One of the children is riding his bicycle back home when the executioner comes on his way and beats him up. The following day, Sarah meets Tom Winston, the man who killed her parents in prison. He advises her to discover what was buried in that house and what was happening in her parents' lives 30 years ago. Sarah then returns home and descends to the basement. She starts looking for some essential items and eventually discovers a box concealed behind the picture. Inside the box, she finds some cassettes, and when she plays it, she sees a private video of Mrs. McBride's husband, Peter. Following this, she approaches Cam to talk to him about Peter, but Cam is equally unfamiliar with it. Later at night, Dylan arrives home from work, and as he is about to enter, Mrs. McBride informs him that Sarah appeared anxious and has left the house. After hearing this, Dylan goes in search of his wife. As soon as he leaves, Mrs. McBride enters Sarah's home and begins looking around. Shortly after, she finds her husband's private video, making her upset. She then picks up the cassette and leaves. Meanwhile, Sarah is walking back home, and on the way, Dylan spots her. He tries to reassure her to keep her from being agitated. He then drops her home before leaving for work. Later, as Mrs. McBride is enjoying her beverage, the doorbell rings. She initially doesn't answer, but when it continues to ring, she is forced to answer. However, when she opens the door, she finds no one outside. Just then, the executioner attacks her, ties her to the bed, and slashes her hand off. Mrs. McBride screams out loud, and when Sarah hears this, she heads towards Mrs. McBride's house. As she enters, she gets terrified to see Mrs. McBride's horrible death. Suddenly, she sees the executioner and attempts to flee, but falls down the stairs, causing her to lose consciousness. The executioner then puts the cassette on Sarah and walks away. After a while, Sarah regains consciousness and finds herself in the hospital, where a police officer and Dylan are having a conversation. When the officer inquires about the perpetrator, she responds that the executioner, not the same person who killed her parents but someone dressed like him, was the murderer. The following day, Sarah pays Tom another visit to inquire about the murder. Tom claims that he can shed a light on the killer's motivation, even though he doesn't know who the murderer is. According to Tom, Mrs. McBride paid the price of her sin with her life. In the meantime, we see the executioner drawing his victim and the way she is murdered. In the next scene, we see a couple named Caleb and Ashley enjoying some alone time in the woods. Suddenly, a frightened child materializes out of the ground, causing the couple to run away in terror. On the other hand, while Sarah and Dylan are discussing Mrs. McBride, Sarah's grandmother, Brenda, shows up. After learning of Mrs. McBride's passing, Brenda decides to stay with them for a few days. Later, Sarah goes to her workplace gallery, where she meets Robin. Before leaving, Robin shares some information about the area and gives her an invitation to the summer solstice social the next afternoon. Following this, she begins to clean her store and puts her paintings on the wall. After some time, a lady named Heather walks into the gallery. It appears that Heather and her beloved Benny used to work in the same place. Heather doesn't seem to be happy with Sarah, as she believes that the latter has seized her place. She says some awful things to her, so Sarah gets her out. Following this, Sarah begins reading each of her mails individually. One of the emails strikes her as odd, and when she opens it, she discovers a finger belonging to Mrs. McBride, making her scared. Later, Cam and the other police officers arrive at the scene. Sarah believes that the executioner is a serial killer, but the officer doesn't think so. She is disappointed that the officers are taking things lightly, rather than warning people about the danger. At night, Sarah makes futile attempts to decipher the meaning of her unusual mail. She then begins to paint the picture of the executioner. Meanwhile, Robin, being gay, is conversing with a man on a video call when the lights get cut off. When he leaves, he discovers that just as his building lights are cut, he goes to check the power voltage and discovers that the wires have been disconnected. Just then, he sees the executioner, so he tries to run away, but the executioner pursues him. Robin reaches the fence, and there's no way to escape. The executioner approaches him and begins to slash at him with the knife. As the executioner prepares to kill him, a man opens the door and manages to save Robin. Following this, Robin is taken to the hospital where Sarah pays a visit. Sarah doubts Heather for the incident, but Justin claims that she is harmless, despite her behavior. Later, Sarah visits Tom to see if he comprehends what the email is about. He takes a look and explains that it is a geographic coordinate that is near her town of Waterbury. Additionally, Tom forbids her from traveling there alone, but she disregards his advice. Meanwhile, Brenda is attempting to convince Dylan to take Sarah to her town since she feels that Sarah is not safe there. Dylan responds that Sarah must make that decision. In the next scene, Sarah is seen leaving for the previously indicated place in the woods. After some time, she stumbles onto a cave, and as she enters, she finds a skeleton, prompting her to call the police for further investigation. They learn that the skeleton is of Peter, Mrs. McBride's husband. Sarah then reveals that Mrs. McBride murdered her husband, and as a result of this transgression, she got killed. She also informs them about Tom, who believes that the executioner kills people for their sins, but the police officer doesn't believe in it. Additionally, Cam advises Sarah to trust the police rather than the person who killed her parents. Later, Brenda tries to persuade Sarah to return home for her safety, but Sarah is adamant about staying away. In the prison, Tom's religious counselor, Alan, visits him, and the two talk about sins and forgiveness. The following day, Justin hosts a summer solstice social party where Sarah and Dylan also show up. Meanwhile, as Robin and Cam are speaking in the hospital, the lights abruptly go off. Following this, Cam goes outside to check the lights, but while he does so, he notices someone walking towards Robin's room. Inside the room, he spots a shadow and believes that the executioner has arrived, so he pleads for assistance. At the same moment, Cam shows up and knocks the person down, but it soon becomes clear that the person is there only to give the flowers. Robin then reads a card that was affixed to the flowers, expressing regret for his loss. They understand that the target is Justin, so Cam informs it to the chief, who is in the party. Sadly, before the chief can take action, Justin perishes from poisoning. Sarah again pays a visit to Tom and tells him about Justin. Tom claims that the assassin is clever since he diverted their attention to one thing while completing the other. Additionally, he asserts that Sarah has just begun to scratch the surface and that there is still plenty to uncover. Tom claims that everyone has secrets that they take to the grave. Meanwhile, a girl is holding a stone while standing on a bridge. As soon as the car approaches, she throws the stone, causing an accident. The next scene begins with a group of friends' journey to the prom celebration in their car. When they go through a bridge, the girl throws a stone, continuing the previous scene. Ada, one of the group members, is hit by the stone and goes into a coma. At present, Dylan and Sarah are returning from Justin's funeral. When they get to the police station, they find out that Heather has been detained and is also being held on suspicion of killing Mrs. McBride. Additionally, Cam claims that he assigned the police officers to stay outside Sarah's home for her protection. In the hospital, Brenda sees Ada, who happens to be her closest friend. A short while later, another friend named Sonia shows up at the hospital. Sonia doesn't appear to like Brenda, as she has been avoiding them for several years. In the meantime, Sarah is deciding where in her art gallery to display her most recent depiction of the executioner. At the same moment, a man walks into the shop and begins pursuing the artwork. The man notices the executioner's artwork, but Sarah makes it clear that it is not for sale. He speaks to her inanely and walks out. Later at home, Sarah tells Dylan that she misses him and asks him to return home soon. She then starts reading her book while a police officer stays outside to ensure her safety. After a while, the police officer is attacked by the executioner and renders him unconscious. At home, Sarah gets a call from an unknown number, and when she answers, she hears a distorted voice. She instantly ends the call and redials the same number. She then hears a phone ringing inside her home. She goes to the stairs to check and notices the executioner heading towards her. Sarah quickly tries to flee outdoors, but the executioner drags her inside. After that, she runs upstairs and hides in a closet. A little while later, the executioner leaves and Cam shows up right on cue to save her. The following morning, Sarah meets Robin and tells her that she has decided to leave the city. She also suggests that he leave the city, but Robin is unable to do so due to his business. Sarah inquires about whether Justin ever committed any wrongdoings, to which Robin recalls something. He then reveals that before they built their home, a poor family had previously resided on the property. After purchasing their property, Justin bulldozed everything, but according to Robin, Justin didn't deserve to die because of just purchasing the property. The next day, Sarah, along with Brenda, pack up their belongings and get ready to leave, but Dylan decides to stay for a couple of weeks because he has a contract for his job. After hearing him out, Sarah becomes enraged and leaves with Brenda. On their way, Brenda tries to manipulate Sarah into breaking up with Dylan and indirectly suggests she be with Cam. Brenda believes Cam likes her, but Sarah doesn't change her mind. While they are conversing, a Jeep suddenly appears in front of them, causing Sarah to drive off the road. Fortunately, none of them are hurt, but their car breaks down. Sarah believes it is the executioner, so Brenda takes her gun from the car and shoots at the Jeep, causing it to go away. Following this, Sarah and Brenda walk into the woods, where Brenda blames herself for everything that has happened. She reveals that her friend, Ada, is in a coma as a result of her sin. Furthermore, she reveals that she wanted to hurt Sonia, so she stayed on the bridge and aimed at Sonia in the car, but she ended up hitting Ada. Sarah is shocked and tells her grandmother to go back and tell the police the truth. However, Brenda refuses to do so because she believes she has been living with guilt her entire life and has paid for the mistake she made as a teenager. Sarah says that it's attempted murder, and they are now in danger as a result of her. Sarah starts walking forward, being upset, but after a while, she doesn't see her grandmother behind her. She then runs back in search of her and discovers her pistol on the ground. On the other hand, the executioner takes Brenda to the lake and ties her feet to a stone. Following this, he throws the stone into the lake, dragging her into the water and drowning her to death. A short while later, Sarah arrives at the location where she sees her grandmother's dead body, breaking her down. After this, the police arrive at the crime scene and Cam attempts to console Sarah. Meanwhile, a lawyer informs Robin of Justin's debts and claims that he must pay all of it, which is worth $2.8 million. The lawyer then advises him to sell all his properties in order to bring him to break even. Robin inquires if Justin did anything wrong to the poor family, to which the lawyer replies that Justin knew someone on the city council who had the land rezoned. As a result of this, the poor family was unable to afford the tax hike and were forced to sell the land at a low price. In the following scene, we see Robin visiting his friend Trent's house. He knocks on the door but receives no response, so he decides to return, but before leaving, he notices a small hut and enters into it. Inside the hut, he feels strange after discovering the skins of various animals and birds. While looking at them closely, Trent arrives with another animal skin. Robin perceives him as a slaughterer, so he hurriedly drives away from the place. Elsewhere, Sarah goes to the hospital where Ada is being treated and tells everything to Sonia, shocking her. Following that, she goes to see Tom in prison and asks him for help in the apprehending of the executioner. According to Tom, the person doing this is blinded by pride, and pride will be their downfall. He also claims that the executioner is lost in zealotry, playing God and pride, but that pride can cause him to make mistakes, which is all she needs to catch the killer. Later, Sarah examines a photograph of herself with her grandmother. Dylan apologizes to Brenda, and while they are talking, the doorbell rings. Sarah opens the door and sees Cam, who informs them that they have discovered the same Jeep that caused the previous accident. He also reveals that the Jeep belonged to Trent, who is none other than Mrs. McBride's nephew. He also suspects Trent of being the executioner and ensures that the case will be closed soon. On the other hand, Trent is seen hunting in the forest. He is about to shoot a deer when he hears another gunshot, causing the deer to flee. Trent is enraged by this and begins yelling at the shooter. Surprisingly, the shooter begins firing at Trent, prompting him to flee into the woods. After running for a while, he trips over a sharp piece of wood and falls into a hole. Following this, the executioner appears and releases several snakes that bite Trent to death. After some time, the police arrive and discover Trent's dead body, adding to the complications on the case. Later, Dylan suggests that Sarah conduct an interview so that they can apprehend the executioner. Sarah then sits for her husband's interview at his workplace. In the interview, she refers to the executioner and murderer, Tom, as a coward. Later, Tom reads her interview in the newspaper and becomes enraged. Following this, Tom calls Sarah from prison and tells her that she cannot shame the executioner simply because he can't kill her. However, Sarah ignores him and asks if he can speak directly in the Bulletin's interview. He agrees on a condition that he wants a lock of her hair as a memento. Sarah becomes enraged and hangs up the phone. In the evening, Sarah is in a restaurant with Robin, and they are discussing possible names for the executioner. Robin informs her that Alan, who frequently visits Tom in prison, could be the one to work on Tom's behalf. At the police station, Trent's girlfriend, June, is being questioned about Trent, but she knows nothing more than the police officers. After the interrogation, June goes to the same restaurant where Sarah and Robin are present. Sarah and Robin appear to have known her from the beginning because June is Cam's ex-wife. She has some drink, and as she prepares to leave, Robin and Sarah approach her. Soon, June removes her clothes and begins swimming in the lake outside the restaurant. Sarah then calls Cam and requests that he take June home. A few moments later, Cam arrives and pulls her out of the water. Before departing, June expresses her envy of Cam and Sarah's relationship. Meanwhile, Dylan and Allison are having dinner with a well-known reporter named Lisa Ann in order to broadcast the executioner's news and alert the public. After listening to them, Lisa Ann agrees to assist them, so they plan to do it through the television show. The next morning, Sarah tells her husband that Tom wanted her hair lock in exchange for being in an interview. Later that afternoon, June visits Sarah and apologizes for her previous behavior. She also expresses her love for Cam, while also caring for Trent. Sarah inquires as to whether Trent has ever committed a sin. June then recalls a time when Trent and she both worked as ambulance drivers. She also claims that one night, Trent saw a sick girl named Ariel, who he could have helped but didn't, and since then, Ariel has been missing. June also reveals this in the police station, and Cam is furious because she has been hiding it for 5 years. Cam then examines CCTV footage from the same night and discovers that Ariel was picked up by an unknown car. On the other hand, Dylan goes to the prison to meet Tom. Before beginning the interview, Dylan hands him Sarah's hair lock as per his mentioned condition. However, before Dylan asks any questions, Tom inquires as to how well Sarah knows him. Dylan appears to be speechless. Following this, Tom meets with Alan and gives him Sarah's hair lock, instructing him to find the person responsible for the deaths. Meanwhile, Heather is yelling in the middle of the street and cursing everyone she suspects of being the perpetrator. It is revealed that Ariel is her daughter, and losing her has broken her down. On the contrary, Sarah is at Allison's office, where she is reviewing more CCTV footage from the night Ariel went missing. While taking a closer look, she notices that June was in the ambulance with Trent, implying that June is the executioner's next target. Sarah and Allison go to the police station and show the evidence to the chief. As soon as the chief learns of this, he orders all police officers to head in search of June, but forbids Cam from accompanying them. Cam appears concerned as June does not answer his phone. He can't just sit around and wait, so he also sets out to find June. Meanwhile, June is in church, praying for Ariel and for forgiveness. Soon after, the executioner approaches from behind, makes her smell some sedatives, and carries her away. Elsewhere, Sarah pays a late-night visit to Cam, who is concerned about June's disappearance. She tries to console him, but he refuses to talk to anyone and leaves. The next morning, June regains her consciousness and finds herself naked in the middle of a large farm. She is laid down with some rat food on her, and her surroundings resemble an ambulance, with glucose bottles, injections, and so on.